Good evening. It's 8 o'clock in Yerushalayim. This is WebYeshiva.org, and it's time for our regular halacha shir. Our topic for this evening and next week is the bracha on matzah. The bracha on matzah. And as with every other little corner of halacha, there are fundamental underlying principles in this situation which go far to illuminating issues throughout the length and breadth of Torah. Well, let's get the source material on the screen and get started. If you want to ask a question during the class, feel free to type your question on chat, and I will see your question and try to incorporate the answer into the ongoing shiur. This is a halacha shiur, so I begin with the Shulchan Aruch. One could begin chronologically, with the earliest sources in Chazal, and then move chronologically through the sources, through the Rishonim, down to the final conclusions in the Shulchan Aruch. But I'm starting with the conclusions at the end, the Shulchan Aruch. And as with all of my classes, I'm not going to bother mentioning exactly where I draw the sources from, because you have the sources exactly on the screen, the siman number, paragraph number, and so forth and so on, so you can check it out. Shulchan Aruch says, pasabab, the certain kind of pot is the Talmudic word, the rabbinic word for bread. There are a lot of differences in vocabulary between biblical Hebrew and rabbinic Hebrew. Rabbinic Hebrew is Mishnaic Hebrew, the kind of Hebrew we have in the Tosefta, in the Midrashim, in the Gemara. There are many differences in vocabulary. For example, in the Torah, the word for tree is eitz. Let's get that typed on chat. In rabbinic Hebrew, the word is ilan. Different word. Well, this is true with every language. Languages evolve, develop, and change in the course of time. The vocabulary tends to change. Just think about English, the language I'm speaking now. Look at English as it was written 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, and of course there are significant changes in vocabulary. Well, pat is the ordinary rabbinic word for bread. And there's some kind of bread called kisanim. Now, what that is, we're going to define this kind of bread in a moment. But after we define it, we'll know that its bracha is borei minei mizonot. Is a kind of bread which gets the bracha not hamotzi lechem min haaretz, but rather borei minei mizonot. Ula'acharav, and after eating it, bracha achat me'en shalosh, one bracha which is like three, like Birkat HaMazon. The full Birkat HaMazon is essentially three brachot, plus a fourth one that was added later. Al HaMichya, what we normally call Al HaMichya, is one bracha, which includes in it the three basic brachot of Birkat HaMazon. Bottom line, the Shulchan Aruch says, Kisanim is a kind of bread which gets mizonot before you eat it, and Al HaMichya after you eat it. What is this pat hababa kisnim? What is this kisanim bread that we're talking about that gets mizonot? Yesh meforshim. There are three commentaries. There are three interpretations. There are three ideas. There are three opinions amongst the rabbis about what kind of bread we're talking about. The Aleph, then there's going to be Bet, and then there's going to be Gimel. Here are the three opinions about what this kisanim stuff is, this kisanim bread that gets the bracha mizonot. First opinion, pata asuri kamin kisim shemimalim oto dvash v'sukkah ve'egozim shkedim v'tavlin. The first opinion is it's a kind of pocket which holds spices and sugar and almonds and, well, sort of like a burekas, sort of like a pie. You've got dough on one side dough on the other side, forming a kind of pocket. And in the pocket, you have pie, you have burekas, and anything like that. Pie is the first kind of bread, which is borei minei mezonot. Bet, the second opinion. Yesh omrim, some people hold, he isa she'erev bo dvash shemen o chalav minei tavlin v'afa. Some people hold it's a kind of bread where the dough has added to it honey, oil, different kinds of spices, and then you bake it. That's what we call cake. Some people hold this sanim, which gets the bracha mizonot, is cake. And afterwards, alamichia. And this, of course, it depends upon the taste of the sugar, the chocolate, the crushed almonds, or whatever it is that you're adding for taste to the cake has to be nikar, has to be noticeable. Otherwise, it's just bread. But if you have noticeable other tastes in there, that's called cake, and borim mizonot al michya. Third opinion, yesh mifarshim. Some people say, I'm such a horrible typist. I should say yesh mifarshim. Some people have a different idea of what kisanim are. Ben mitubelet, ben she'ena mitubelet, she'osim oto ka'achim yeveshim kosesim oto. Some people hold that it's a dough, whether it has spices in it or not, whether it has other flavors in it or not, but it's made like a dry cracker that you can chew. Well, we have three opinions of what kind of bread gets borei mezonot and alamechia. First opinion, pie. Second opinion, cake. Third opinion, crackers. Well, if you want to know the categorization of malawach or anything else, just ask yourself, does it fit into one of these categories? Is there the taste of something noticeable in there besides the flour, the water, the yeast, and the salt? If so, it has the halachic status of cake. That's number two. Well, this specific example of malawach is not a cracker, but other examples might have the status of a pie, something being filled with meat or cheese or spinach or anything. Okay, so we have three opinions. Now, of course, we're going to know which is the opinion that halacha embraces. When do we say mizonot? And the answer is, these are still the words of the Shulchan Aruch, halacha kedivrei kulam. Bottom line, halacha accepts all three opinions. Anything which is pie or cake or cracker, any of the three categories gets the bracha mizonot. So we're going to get to these questions of how to taste things later. Bottom line, the Shulchan Aruch says that any of these three categories changes the bracha on the product from hamotzi lechem min haaretz and birkat hamazon to borei mezonot and alamechia. Shalachol elu devarim notnim luhem dinim sha'amar v'pata baba kisnim. All these three categories are acceptable. Now, this is a very interesting point. We have three opinions, apparently a controversy. Some rabbis held this way, some rabbis held that way, some rabbis held the third way, and along comes the Shulchan Aruch and says they're all right. They're all correct. It's not really a machlokes. It's not really a disagreement. Well, let's see how the poskim understand the relationship between these opinions. Here's a quotation from the Beis Ephraim, and I choose the Beis Ephraim not only because it's one of the most important of the poskim, but because on this particular issue, his approach is the approach which is more or less universally embraced by subsequent poskim. He says, "Be'inyan shalosh shitot b'hagdarat patava b'kisnim," regarding the definition of the three categories which get the bracha borei minei mizonot, he writes as follows: Lo pligi bi'akadin. The three opinions are not in disagreement with each other, like you might have thought. Rak b'pitron milat kisanim. They just disagree about the dictionary definition of the word kisanim. One held that it's a kind of roasted product. Another held that kisanim refers to spices or flavors which were added. Another holds that the word kisanim comes from the word koses, which means to chew, something which is crispy like a cracker and gets chewed. They disagree about the dictionary meaning of the word kisanim, but makom makom, nonetheless, as far as halacha is concerned, ikar hatam lefisha ein likboa alav lo tiknu birkat hamotzi. The underlying concept here is that some kinds of bread, what you and I would call ordinary bread, some kinds of bread are the kinds of bread that people establish, that people base their meals on. Some kinds of bread, people base their meals. Other kinds of bread are not intended for meals, but are intended for snacks. We have to distinguish not between what are the ingredients? Is it crispy? Is it like a pie? Is it hard enough to be called a cracker, or is it too soft to be called a cracker? We don't have to ask these questions because the underlying concept here is this the kind of product that people snack on? If so, or is this the kind of product that people base their proper meals on, breakfast, lunch, and dinner? If so, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, netilat yadayim, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and birkat hamazon. Mizeh yesh lilmod kol ma she'ein regilim likboa. Therefore, anything which people usually eat as a snack and not part of a proper meal, like the Gemara mentions, the example of small rolls, little loaves of bread, a small loaf of bread, but not a loaf, a small roll, not really big enough for anyone to eat in a proper meal, but you might eat it as a snack. Well, borei minei mizonot. The rule is not to ask, does it fall in the category of a pie? How much filling does it have? Does it have enough filling? The rule is not, does it fall into the category of cake? How much spices? How much sugar? Is the chocolate really enough? Is the cinnamon really enough? No, that's not the question. The question is not, is it hard enough to be called a cracker, or is it still too soft for that? No. This is not the question. The question which has to be answered is this something that people eat as the main part of a proper meal, or is this something which is snacked on? V'aftalo breirelad milsa kuli hai, and even though we have no way of establishing what the correct dictionary definition of the word kisanim is, and there are different opinions about the correct dictionary definition, the real issue, whether or not it's intended, whether or not it's usually used for a proper meal. A small challah roll, for example. Now, if you think about it for a moment, you'll realize that the recipes that most people are using to bake challah, or the challah that you buy in the store for Shabbos and Yontif. There are a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff in those recipes. People put in, there are as many different recipes as there are households. But people put in eggs. They put in oil. They put in sugar. They put in all kinds of things in the challah. Does that make it a cake and therefore borei minei mizonot? No, that's the wrong question. The correct question is, are people eating it as part of a proper meal? Oh, you're eating it as part of your Shabbos meal. It's netilat yadayim, hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and birkat hamazon. Someone else might be baking a very similar recipe, and it's just for a snack together with a cup of coffee. Borei minei mizonot and ala michya. The point of the Beis Ephraim is not to be picky and overly concerned about exactly what is a pie, what is a cake, what is a cracker. What you should be concerned with is this something that you eat as part of a proper meal. Therefore, the recipes that people use for challah, and as you point out on chat, I also think that many of the recipes used for challah, indistinguishable from cake, as far as I'm concerned, perhaps even preferable to cake. But since that is the bread which is being used for the proper meal, on Shabbos, for example, or on Yom Tov, it's proper lechem, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Someone else might be baking the same or very similar recipe and eating it only to accompany a cup of coffee for a snack from time to time. Borei minei mizonot. According to the Beis Ephraim, that's the way to distinguish. But let's go one step further. The Lavush. Rav Mordechai Yafeh was the disciple, the Talmud of the Ramah, and the Ramah added the Ashkenaz notes to the Shulchan Aruch, and in general, where the Ramah is very brief, and the Ramah is almost always very brief, the Lavush, his disciple, his Talmud, repeats the same idea at greater length and therefore with fuller explanation. Therefore, the Lavush is the first place to look for a fuller explanation of anything you find in the words of the Ramah in the Shulchan Aruch. Here's what he says. Anu naktinin kedivrei kulam. We accept all three opinions. Pie, cake, and crackers. They're all mizonot. Shekol elu nikru padaba b'kisnim. All three categories qualify as mizonot. Ve'en mevachin ma'alem hamotzi. They don't get hamotzi. They don't get shalosh brachot. Shalosh brachot means birkat hamazon. It was a fourth bracha which was added later. Ela borei b'nei mizonot is the correct bracha, and me'ain shalosh, and alamichia afterwards, which is alamichia includes material extracted from the three brachas of birkat hamazon. Lo kavu chachamim hamotzi u'shlosh brachot ela b'kezayet afilu b'kezayet ela b'lechem shederech rov b'nei adam likboa alav sudato. Hamotzi, in order to qualify for hamotzi, it must be the kind of product, the kind of bread that rov b'nei adam, most people in your society, are using for a proper meal. Up until this point, we might have gotten the impression it all depends upon whether you eat it as a snack or whether you eat it as a proper meal. Up until this point, we might have gotten the impression that it all depends upon whether you would take a slice of it to have for coffee, with coffee from time to time, mizonot, or whether you would use it only in a Shabbos meal. But as the Lavush points out, it doesn't depend upon you. It depends upon rov b'nei adam. It depends upon what is most common in your society. Now, of course, what is common in different societies varies from time to time and place to place. Just think of the various kinds of Yemenite products that we mentioned earlier. How they're used varies from society to society. You could add lahouh to the list. All the Yemenite recipes. The oh well, it depends upon what is most common. Now, of course, the difference between water challah and egg challah is whether or not it has eggs in it. And, many people might be using water challah without eggs on Shabbos. That's my wife's recipe, for example. Or other people might be using challah with eggs on Shabbat and Yom Tov for their su'udot. I've not done a survey, but I'm pretty sure, I didn't actually go out and count, but I'm pretty sure that a huge number of people out there are buying, just look in the bakeries and the tons of sweetened egg challah that they're selling for Shabbat and Yom Tov. I'm quite sure that a huge number of people are eating them for their su'udot, hamotzi, and birkat hamazon. How does one define community? So community depends upon which segment of the society you are attached to. For example, if you are a member of a Yemenite synagogue and you follow Yemenite minhagim, and you go to Yemenite rabbis for instruction about halachic matters, then your community is the community of Yemenites. Back in the good old days, when all was right in the world, every town, every village, every city had a single uniform minhag. Everyone was the same. Only after the expulsion of the Jews from Spain do we have mixed communities in the same town, in the same village. And since the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, so you have to determine which community in town you belong to. Before the expulsion of the Jews from Spain, every town, every village, every city had a uniform lockstep minhag, which was the minhag of that location. Now, it depends upon whom you associate yourself with. Now, in any event, the Lavush has told us that if in your society people are using egg challah or any of the baked products we've alluded to so far, if that's what they're using for their Shabbos meals, Netilat Yadayim, Motzi, and Birkat Hamazon. Aval, kol השינוי שאין דרך רוב בני האדם לעשות כמותו לקבוע עליו סעודה. But if you change the recipe in a way that most people will not be eating it as part of their regular meals, rather, they'll be having it as a snack, lo chiyavu livarech hamotzi, there's no obligation to make a motzi, no obligation for birkat hamazon, instead, mizonot and ala michia. Well, among the conclusions we have is that matzah, which is clearly like a cracker, and aside from Pesach, people are in general not eating it as the basis of their Shabbos meals. Most people, and it really doesn't matter which community you belong to, all year long, most people are using challah, or what you and I would call normal bread, for hamotzi in Shabbos Sudas. There are some people out there who might be eating matzah, but it's surely not the majority of any community. On Pesach, on the other hand, where matzah is our bread, of course, on Pesach, that is what everyone is eating in their Shabbos meals, on Shabbos Chol HaMoed Pesach, and in their Yom Tov meals on Pesach. That is what everyone is eating. So on Pesach, it's surely the crispy matzah, the like a cracker, is surely hamotzi lechem min haaretz with netilat yadayim and birkat hamazon. But for the rest of the year, where people in general are not using it in their Shabbos meals, not using it in their Yom Tov meals, should be borei minim mezonot. But you and I know perfectly well that in Ashkenaz communities, people make the bracha hamotzi on matzah all year long. Unlike in Sephardic communities, where on Pesach, matzah is hamotzi lechem min haaretz, but for the rest of the year, it's a cracker like any other cracker, and therefore borei minim mezonot on Pesach. It is our bread, and that's what we eat in Leil HaSeder, Shabbos Chol HaMoed, and in every other important meal on Pesach. The rest of the year, we don't eat matzah, as in Shabbos Sudas and so forth and so on. Therefore, the rest of the year, Sephardic communities say borei minim mezonot. Ashkenaz communities, for some reason, which we've not yet explained, continue to say hamotzi lechem min haaretz all year long. And this deserves an explanation, which is going to take a while to get to. Now, at this point, where is the... here it is. The Gaon Melissa. The Gaon Melissa was an extraordinarily influential posek. He's most famous for his commentaries on the Shulchan Aruch, on the Choshen Mishpat and the Yoreh Deah, which are absolutely fundamental. He also wrote a book called Derech Chaim, fundamental book on the halachas of davening, brachas, daily and Shabbos and Yom Tov matters. That book, Derech Chaim, is quoted a huge number of times in the Mishnah Brura and relied upon. Bottom line, the Gaon Melissa that we are about to quote is one of the all-time most influential poskim. Now, let's see what he says, and let's see the upshot, the conclusion, the importance of what he teaches us. These are his words. Ikar tam haptor. The principal reason why certain kinds of bread are exempt from hamotzi lechem min haaretz and birkat hamazon, rather they get mizonot borei minim mezonot and alamechia. The reason is b'pat babakisnim hu mishum de kevan de alpat kazeh ein regilim likboa alav suda, because it's a kind of bread that we don't use as the basis of a suda. Yeah, there is a rule, which I'm not going to deal with tonight, that if you eat a humongous amount of mizonot, it changes into hamotzi. It becomes a meal if you eat a huge amount. And of course, the poskim are divided about exactly what a huge amount is, but it has to be an awful lot. And it's unusual, very unusual, that people eat so much cake, pie, or crackers. But that's exactly how much that is a subject for different shiur, but it's a lot. Bottom line, the Gaon Melissa has told us it all depends upon what you use as a meal. But now comes the important question. Who decides what a meal is? That's what the rabbi has to decide. The rabbi has to decide what is called a meal. V'chol shehu pat she'eno mederech ha'olam l'kbo alav suda lefi re'ut einav, anything which, in the opinion of the rabbi, is not the basis of a proper meal, that has the status of kisanim and gets the bracha of borei minim mezonot. Now let's think about this for a minute, because it's a principle of great importance. Think for a moment about your parents. You're much younger than I. Think for a moment about your grandparents' generation. In your grandparents' generation, or in my parents' generation. um, the balabusta, the housewife, put 3 meals on the table every day. Indeed, that's much of what the balabusta, what the housewife did. She prepared 3 proper meals every day. In those days, which are largely vanished from the contemporary world, everyone knew exactly what a proper meal was. It was breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And at every meal, there was bread on the table. There was butter on the table. If it was a milchik meal, meat would be served, fish would be served. There'd be 2 or 3 courses. You'd have an introductory course. You'd have a dessert. 3 proper meals a day in my parents' generation, and the idea of snacking in the course of the day was more or less unheard of. Back in those days, a coffee break meant a cup of coffee and nothing else, because you were eating 3 full, proper meals a day. Well, times have changed. And by the time we get down into your generation, most people are going through their lives snacking. Um, they were thinner indeed, and this is one of the reasons. People nowadays go through their lives snacking. Now, and going through their lives basically snacking. Proper meals nowadays are largely restricted to Shabbat, Yom Tov. You go to a wedding, you have a proper meal. Uh, Shabbat, Yom Tov, at events. At events, you'll be served a proper meal. But from that, most people go through their lives just snacking. Um, uh, Someone might have a slice or 2 of pizza for their lunch. Well, according to the Gaon Melissa, the rabbi has to decide, just because they call it their lunch, is that a proper meal? If, in the opinion of the rabbi, those 2 slices, maybe 3 slices of pizza for lunch are not a proper meal, has the structure, has the form of what we eat on Shabbat, on Yom Tov, at a wedding, at a bar mitzvah, at a significant event. A few slices of pizza is not a proper. It's a snack, and it's true. People go through their lives snacking, but it doesn't make it a meal, according to the Gaon Melissa. Well, if you're just having pizza for lunch, that falls into the category of pie, Borei Mine Mizonot and Al Hamichia. Let's take this one step further and see if we can apply these principles to matzah. Where is it? There are 2 poskim who wrote at length about the issue of the bracha on matzah. They're number one, the Tzitz Eliezer, whom we're going to look at now, and later we're going to get to the Minhat Yitzchak, who also wrote at length about it. There's a third posek, Chelkas Yaakov, who wrote briefly about the issue. We'll come to him as well. But since these tshuvot of the Tzitz Eliezer and the Minhat Yitzchak are so lengthy and encyclopedic in their presentation, I'm just going to summarize various points and only quote a few lines here and there in their tshuvas, which give their bottom line conclusions. The problem that the Tzitz Eliezer is dealing with, the same problem that the other poskim that we're going to be looking at are dealing with, is the problem that I alluded to earlier. It seems quite clear that according to the principles, matzah all year long should be borei minei mezonot and alamechia. Why, oh why, are Ashkenazim saying the bracha hamotzi lechem min haaretz and birkat hamazon with netilat yadayim. Why, oh why, are Ashkenazim doing that all year long? Sfaradim say boring. That was once shortly before Pesach. I entered the house of Rav Mordechai Eliyahu, one of the great Sephardic authorities, to consult with him. And he was sitting there at his desk together with a few other rabbis, and they were eating matzah. And I come into his room, and he says to me, "Here, borei minei mezonot, take some matzah, eat it. We have to finish this before Pesach." I'm Ashkenazi, and I make the bracha hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and I didn't want to get involved, so I said no, thank you. But the practice of Sfaradim makes perfect sense. On Pesach, matzah is what we use for every Yontif meal, for every Shabbos meal. During the year, it's mostly, I guess there's some people who are using it for Shabbos Sudas and Bar Mitzvahs. I guess that happens, but surely not very common. The rest of the year, Borei Minei Mezonot, the Sephardic position makes perfect sense. How can one justify the Ashkenaz position of saying Hamotzi all year long? We start now with the Tzitz Eliezer. His bottom line conclusion is, Min Hagan shel alfei revavot Yisrael ba'aretz v'chutz la'aretz. The practice of thousands of Ashkenaz Jews in Israel, in chutz la'aretz, noagim leharech hamotzi ulezamen al matzahs. The practice of saying hamotzi lechem min haaretz on matzah, and even if three men eat together, birkat hazimun, rabotai nevarech. This practice, which thousands and thousands of Ashkenaz Jews are doing, kol shana, all year long, ke'alpat, as though matzah is ordinary bread. And this practice of the Ashkenazim, considering matzah to be ordinary bread, beli shum pikpuk, without any doubts in the world, din pad gomu. This is, in fact, the practice of Ashkenazim. But why? Well, let's see his explanations. These are the sources upon which he bases his conclusion that one can justify, one can approve of the Ashkenaz minhag. There's a passage in the Shiurei Knesset HaGedolah. The Shiurei Knesset HaGedolah was written by Reb Chaim Ben Vinisti. And the Sefer is, it's a shelf, 2 shelves full of Svarim. It's a very important collection of manuscript material from the days of the Rishonim. Reb Chaim Ben Vinisti was a very wealthy man. He collected a huge number of very important manuscripts, and therefore his series is very, very important, among other reasons, because a lot of the material which he collected is available nowhere else. In any event, Nish'alti, I was asked, Al ha'ochel matzah. I was asked about someone who is making matzah, nilosha b'mayim levad. The kneading of the dough was done only with water. No oil, no eggs, no other liquid, only water. No oil, no eggs, no nothing, just water in the dough. Flour and water. Acha Pesach, once Pesach is gone, what should one say? What should the bracha be? Im tzarich netilas netila u'birkat hamazon. Does matzah require netilas yadayim and birkat hamazon? That's the question. Heshafti, I answered. Lo dami lepata babakisnim shehem bishkuj. The matzah is not like kisanim, not like any of the 3 categories of borei minei mezonot, and specifically, he uses the Spanish word bizcocho. Bizcocho, the pronunciation of Spanish, like just about every other language, the pronunciation changes in the course of time. English today is no longer pronounced the way it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago. The same could be said of any language, I'm sure. The pronunciation changes. And one of the key ways that we can establish the pronunciation of a language in earlier historical periods is to look at the way we have transcriptions of that language in other alphabets. When the Greeks came to Eretz Yisrael back in the days of Chazal, how did they write the names of people? How did they write the names of places in Greek letters? That goes far to teach us what the pronunciation of Hebrew was in those days. Well, here we have the Rav Chaim ben Vinisti in the Knesset HaGedolah giving us the Spanish word spelled in Hebrew letters. And he wrote this. This is a text which is coming from the 16th century. So this gives us a good clue in how Spanish was pronounced in those days. You probably know that the Z, the Z, the last letter of the Spanish alphabet, last letter of the English alphabet, in most areas in Spain today is pronounced like a TH. Bizcocho. In most areas in South America, but not all, it's pronounced like an S. Bizcocho. Nowhere is it pronounced like a Z in the Spanish-speaking world. But in any event, the spelling of the word in Hebrew letters goes far to indicate how it was actually pronounced in Spain in the 16th and 17th century. But in any event, the word is used not only in Italian, the word is used in most European languages because the word is really a portmanteau. The word is really two separate words which have been combined together. Bis, which means twice in Latin, twice. At the end of the concert, you go to a concert hall. At the end of the concert, if the audience liked the performance, they might shout out, "Encore, encore! We want an additional performance." In European languages, people will shout, encore is French, but in France they don't use the word. In European languages, at the concert, if people want an additional performance, they'll shout out, bis, bis, do it again, do it a second time, bis, a second time. That's the first syllable of the word. The second syllable of the word, in French, for example, which comes into the English biscuit, the cuit in biscuit, or the cocho in Spanish, or the scotti in scotto. Scotto is singular, scotti is plural in Italian. The second syllable means cooked or baked. Baked twice. First, you bake the bread, then you bake it again in order to make it crispy. That's what a biscuit is, twice baked. The word biscuit means twice baked. First, it's ordinary bread, and the second time around, you dry it out more and it gets bisky, what you and I would call toast. Toast. First, ordinary bread goes into the toaster for further baking to dry it out more, and it comes out what we would call toast, biscuit. We find the same approach in the Mora K'tzia, written by Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz in the 18th century. Quoting Rav Hai-Gaon, the great rabbi in Babylonia in the Gaonic period, Ein sarich netila, lo gora hamatzah melachman niyot sheblina ava lechem gomorhu, umevarchim alav hamotzi ubirkat hamazon. According to Rav Hai-Gaon, the great rabbi of Babylonia, if you bake the bread twice, the second time around, drying it out in order to make what we would call toast, crispy toast, How crispy is the toast? Is it really soft? Does it still have a little bit of flexibility in it, or is it mamish hard like a cracker? Who cares? The idea is it's still lechem. Just baking it a second time does not disqualify its status as being proper bread requiring hamotzi. And that's what matzah is. Matzah sheblilato ava v'nafid b'tanur. After all, matzah, which is made with ordinary dough, the dough is the same consistency as any other dough. It's baked in the oven. It comes out hard like a biscuit. It comes out hard as though it were double baked. Yesh levarech alav hamotzi v'shalosh brachot v'li. It requires the bracha of hamotzi, Birkat Hamazon, and the Tilat Yadayim. According to Rav Hai Gaon, the fact that bread has been baked so long that it's become dry and hard does not eliminate its status as being proper bread and remains hamotzi. That is the basis. Yeah, okay. Exactly, and historically, historically, this is largely what biscuits were baked for. Earlier, as someone pointed out, I don't remember who, someone pointed out on chat a few minutes ago that this has a lot to do with Eruv Chatzerot, Eruv Chatzerot, which permit carrying within the enclosed area of the neighborhood, the town, where there's a physical or a symbolic wall around the neighborhood, around the town. In order to permit carrying on Shabbat, you also need a loaf of bread. Since we want the loaf of bread to last for a whole year, so they bake it until it's hard, like matzah, and then it lasts a whole year. According to Rav Hagon, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Oh, so here we see an opinion. Not everyone's going to agree, of course, but here we see a source. Here we see at least someone, Rav Hai Gaon, quite significant, who holds that crispy matzah, like a cracker, is hamotzi all year long, just because it was baked so long that it became dried out and hard does not eliminate its status of being proper bread. So there is a makkah. There is a source for hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Now, here's another sefer, another source, Beit David, typical of the Tzitz Eliezer. His tshuvot are all encyclopedic and always marshal together a huge number of sources in order to demonstrate the legitimacy of this opinion or that opinion, and then he draws his conclusion based upon the sources which he brings. The Beit David says as follows: Ta'ama acharina. There's another reason to consider matzah to be hamotzi. L'chalek ben delo dami matzah lebiskuitim. V'hu mipnei she'abiskuitim hakoshi shelahem hu mehamat shechozrim v'notnim l'tanur. The biscuits, which they were talking about, are twice baked. They are returned to the oven after having been properly baked. Just like you take a properly baked slice of bread and return it to the oven, what you and I would call a toaster, return it to the oven for further drying out. After it's been properly baked, you return it to the oven for drying out. Afilu ein chozrim litein oto b'tanur el shemanichim oto b'tanur yoter mikdai tzorkam she'af shekvar nigmar afiyatam. And it doesn't, in concept, it doesn't make any difference whether you are returning it to the oven or you just leave it in the oven long enough to dry out in the first place. There's no reason to distinguish between a secondary baking to dry out, or just a single lengthy baking to dry out. In concept, what's important is it has dried out. Matzot. Ein mashim oto b'tanur yoter mikdei afiyatan. Matzot are left in the oven only as long as necessary. They are taken out of the oven the moment they reach the perfection of baking. Indeed, in the hand matzah bakery, the most the most difficult job, the highest paid job in the hand matzah bakery, is the guy who with a pole puts the matzah into the oven. The matzah is draped over a pole. He pushes the matzah into the oven with a flip of the wrist. The matzah is deposited on the floor of the oven. He observes very carefully, and at exactly the right moment, when the matzah is perfectly ready, he takes it out of the oven. That's the most difficult and the highest paid job in the hand matzah bakery. But whether it's hand matzah or machine-made matzah, the matzahs are baked exactly to the point of perfection and not a moment longer, and hopefully not a moment less. Miyad rodim otam min hatanur. The matzah is immediately taken out of the oven, or if it's a machine process, it's all automatic. The ending of the baking is at exactly the proper moment. Mashem kashot, the fact that they come out hard like crackers, is because they're so thin. And they get hard because they are baked in the proper way. They have no second baking, and since they have no second baking, they're only baked once to the point of perfection. That is the way that's the way the matzah is supposed to be baked, and that's hamotzi lechem min haaretz. Lechem changes into mizonot when it is rebaked a second time beyond its ideal baking time in order to dry it out. Furthermore, biscuits twice baked, people do not typically use for their Shabbos meals, their Yom Tov meals, or for a bar mitzvah. You serve proper bread. You don't serve biscuits as the basis of a bar mitzvah or a wedding or any proper meal at all. Lachein einu mevarich alehem hamotzi birkat hamazon aval hamatzos shederech b'nei adam l'kol alehem matzah gets the bracha hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So far we have two sources. Rahagon, we saw on the previous screen, who holds that matzah all year long is hamotzi, and now a second source, Beit Dovid, who holds that in order to lose the status of hamotzi, it's not enough that it be baked into the form of a cracker, but it must be re-baked a second time in order to get to that status. Now notice in passing that if we would embrace this opinion, we would be forced to the conclusion that any crackers, breadsticks, anything crispy and hard that you buy in the store should be hamotzi lechem min haaretz all year long, if we would embrace this opinion. Because whether we're talking about breadsticks, grissini in Italian, or whether we're talking about any crackers that you buy in the supermarket, they're all baked once to the point of perfection and taken out of the oven. According to the Beis Dovid, since they're not re-baked, their crispiness, their cracker-like characteristics do not qualify them as mizonot. They remain hamotzi. But at least we have two poskim, both of which are in agreement for different reasons, both of which are in agreement that matzah is hamotzi all year long. Let's go one step further. Tzitz Eliezer further says, and I'm just giving a few lines from here and there in his tshuva, Bimei Beit David, matzat mechona lo haya nafutz. Back when the Beit Dovid wrote his tshuva about single baking always being hamotzi and only double baking being mizonot, back when he wrote this, machine matzahs existed, but they were really just beginning. Back in those days, almost everyone was eating hand matzahs. They'd just begun with machine matzah production back in those days. Haya rak matzot yad. They were eating handmade matzahs. ברור שבשאר ימות השנה לא היה קביעותה לאכול מצה יד. And therefore, of course, all year long they were not eating matzah. After all, handmade matzah was made only for Pesach, and they were not making it all year long. They didn't have machine-made matzahs back in those days. לכן, לא הכשיר לקביעותה רק matzah שנשאר מפסח. And therefore, the matzah he was talking about was matzah that was left over from Pesach. On Pesach, it was surely hamotzi, and the small number, the small amount of matzah that was left over after Pesach, well, for the last 7-8 days, it was hamotzi, and they continued saying hamotzi and that, but that lasted only a day or two after. After that, there was no longer any matzah available. B'yameinu. Nowadays, on the other hand, nafotz lafot le'achol matzah chametz b'chol yimot hashana. Nowadays, they bake huge amounts of machine matzah all year long, and indeed, most of the matzah which they're baking all year long is technically not matzah at all. Not allowed to eat it on Pesach. It's chametz. But it looks like matzah and it tastes like matzah, and that's what they're baking in huge quantities by machine all year long. Alafim kovi alehem, and thousands of Jews, I don't know exactly where these thousands of Jews are, but he saw thousands of Jews who were eating matzah as part of their proper meals. What do I know about what all the Jews are doing out there? But he was of the opinion that thousands of Jews are eating machine matzah as part of their proper meals, Shabbos, Yom Tov, and so forth, all year long. B'chol ki hai gavna barosh gam b'ta'amo yodeh. Even the Beit Dovid would agree that the machine-made matzah, which the Jews are eating all year long as part of their proper meals, requires the bracha of hamotzi. Derech b'nei adam likbo aleim suda, shapir litol yadayim, and therefore, of course, netilas yadayim is required, and hamotzi and birkat hamazon. Well, the Tzitz Eliezer, based on his two sources, comes to the conclusion that nowadays our machine-made matzah, since people are using our machine-made matzah all year long for proper meals, therefore, hamotzi lechem min haaretz. You might disagree, and you might have different observations. You might wonder, like I do, where are these thousands of Jews who are eating matzah as part of their regular meal on Shabbos and Yom Tov? Well, maybe they're out there somewhere, and the Tzitz Eliezer knew about it, but I don't. In any event, if that practice exists, then the correct bracha is indeed hamotzi. Let's just complete the skira, the survey of the Tzitz Eliezer. Matzat mechona, machine-made matzah. Nowadays, it's not so hard. It's not so crispy. It's not so much like a cracker. Machine-made matzah nowadays, not so stiff. Adrabah, on the contrary. B'triatan hen rakot v'ne'echlot bakal. Fresh, machine-made matzah is soft and very easily eaten. Again, it's not entirely clear to me what brand of matzah he's talking about. I've not seen this matzah that he's talking about, which when it's fresh is still soft, machine-made matzah. Lefichach, therefore, everyone should agree that matzah does not have the status of biscuit twice baked, and therefore requires netilas yadayim, hamotzi, and birkat hamazon. This is the approach of the Tzitz Eliezer, which, as I have indicated, is somewhat weak in my opinion. Who am I, and what am I to disagree with the great Tzitz Eliezer? But his approach is based largely on his observation that, number one, machine-made matzahs are soft and not like crackers, and number two, that thousands of Jews are using them as the basis of regular meals. If the facts are correct as he postulates them, then his conclusion is correct. That's the Tzitz Eliezer. We're left with this one problematic tshuva of the Tzitz Eliezer, justifying hamotzi all year long. I'm going to pause at this point, and next week, Im Yirtzeh Hashem, we'll see more tshuvot, which will help round out the picture. Until then, I wish you a good week and a safe week, and look forward to seeing you all again next week.
Thank you, Rabbi. Stay safe.
You too.
Thank you very much.
Pleasure.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Fink. Thank you, Shavua Tov.
Thank you, Rabbi. I was having lunch during your class and was eating the very matzah we're talking about because I do have it as my regular bread every day.
There we go. Okay, so maybe is right. Okay.
and said the hamotzi. So there you go.
Now I have a good clue to your time zone. Okay.
Oh yes, I'm in Maryland, USA,
Yeah.
East Coast.
Yeah. Silver Spring.
Yeah,
right.
I have a late lunch every day. Thank you.
Okay, shalom.
Be safe.
Shalom.
Thank you very much, Rabbi.
My pleasure. You're welcome.
Rabbi, I have a quick question.
Yes, Moshe.
So my question is, I wonder if the Tzitz Eliezer was referring possibly to the idea that a lot of people, I know in Toronto here, for instance, people might take a piece of matzah on a regular Shabbos and use it for lunch as the second loaf. Like they'll have a bilka, and then maybe would use it, or for an erev tafshilin, they would use it with a boiled egg, and that matzah becomes the erev tafshilin. This kind of a concept. And once you say hamotzi on it, because you're using it as your second loaf, your second piece, because it's a whole piece of matzah, especially if I'm left over with whole round shmura at the end of Pesach, I'll continue to use them up over the Shabbos. But if we're doing that, then wouldn't it become like a main part of the meal because you've used it actually for the hamotzi itself?
You're absolutely correct. And if you're correct in the facts that in Toronto and perhaps in other places as well, people indeed are using a matzah as lechem mishnah, and people indeed are using a matzah and a boiled egg or a can of tuna fish for eruv tavshilin. If in fact that's what people are doing, then the Tzitz Eliezer is entirely correct.
Right. Yeah, my father had a minhag. I mean, he wouldn't touch a piece of matzah after the 1st of Nisan until Pesach because he wanted it. But I don't know how far you're supposed to take it up until Leil Seder.
Mm-hmm.
Is it just the week before?
I also don't.
You don't also, bracha.
I also don't. Yeah, but nonetheless, if I need an
don't eat
eruv
matzah
on Pesach,
from Rosh Chodesh pizza.
Yeah,
right.
I also don't. But still, on Pesach, of course, you'd use matzah for the eruv tavshilin. There's no other way to do it. But if people are doing it another yamim tovim the rest of the year, then the Tzitz Eliezer is correct.
All right. If there's enough matzah left over till Shavuos, it could be. Anyway, thank you for the question. I wish you a kosher and Pesach and Freilich and Pesach and safety and Eretz Yisrael and only great things, Rabbi. Okay.
Amen. Okay.
Thank you. Beautiful shir. All right.
Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi.
You're welcome. Thank you.